Vichakun, I'm one of the council member and the chair for the lecture committee here. But before I introduce the speaker this evening for Bangkok Modern Architecture of the 1950s and 1970s, Mr. Walter Koditek, there's a few announcements I'd like to make. First of all, there's a lot of activities in the upcoming months. For lectures or talks, this Saturday, there will be a talk in Thai for the Literary Lounge on ASEAN and colonial anxiety of the UK in Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Quite a long title. And it's by a very interesting person whose name is Dr. Ming. Last name is Panha, which means problem in Thai. So if you're keen, please come. Now, and the next lecture on Thursday, 5th of June, will be called Reinforced Modernity, the Hennebik, or I'm not sure whether it's pronounced Hennebik or Onebik, system of reinforced concrete in the Ananta Samakom Throne Hall by Dr. Pinay Sirikiatikun. This is the first Thursday of June. Then on Saturday, 7th of June, this is very timely, the Myanmar MW 7.7 earthquake, exploring the earthquake through the lens of satellite technology by Salvatore Virdis. Dr. Salvatore Virdis will talk about the recent earthquake. Now, for concert, we have on last Wednesday of May 28th, it's the Levant Andalusia Trio by Ali Omar El Farouk on flamenco guitar and oud, Bartosz Dvorak violin, and Lutsat Kursidlo on Kojon Rik Durbuka and frame drum. If you're curious about these interesting musical instruments and their sounds, please come and join. Then we go to Japan. The Koto Festival in Bangkok on June 24th. Here at the auditorium. Now, if you're keen to watch whales, hopefully we'll see whales, because they said if we don't see a whale, you get your refund. Whale watching in the Upper Gulf of Thailand on 5th of June will be led by Mr. James Dent. So hopefully we've seen some whales. Then in September, we have a study trip to, the name is called Tales of the Balkans, through Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, will be led by Kun Kanita Kasina Ubon, who is the managing director of SAM Society. Now welcome to this evening lecture. Bangkok Modern Architecture have seen its ups and downs, because in the last few decades, a few things have been gone and some of them still intact. You probably have seen, if you're lucky enough, the old Scala cinema at the corner of Sam Square and Patuman intersection. It's totally gone. Dusit Thani, the old one's gone, the new one's built with two buildings next to it. And the robot building here, the facade that looks like a robot, it's gone. The structure still looks similar to that, but no more eyes and ears. For post-war architecture, lots of us sometimes think that maybe they're not historically or culturally significant enough because it's been recent. It's either our own era or our parents' era. But last year, Dr. Chung, what is his name? No, Dr. Chai Chon. Chom Chon. Dr. Chom Chon Pusin Paiboon and myself, we led a study trip, a day trip to view some Bangkok modern architecture or modernist architecture in the beginning of Sukhumvit area, we came to see the auditorium of the Siam Society, the Watana College and church next to this, and Indian Embassy on Soi Prasan Mit. And after lunch, we went to see Ambassador Hotel, just the foyer, and all the old lobby, Miami Hotel, and then the Swiss Embassy. So perhaps in the near future, we can arrange something to visit all this interesting architecture. Now this evening, Mr. Walter Koditek, who's now based in Cambodia, will talk about his fascination of these buildings and structures of post-war era in Bangkok. He has done several books on Hong Kong and Cambodia. And of course, he's based in Berlin, and Berlin has some stunning architecture there. So may I welcome you this evening. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Very grateful that such a big audience could make it to the society this evening. First of all, I want to thank River Books and Mom Luang, Kun Narissa of River Books for making this possible, and then also for the society of giving the opportunity and of organizing this. I'm very flattered. I talked to my wife on the phone this morning and told her if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would give a lecture at the Siam Society, and of all things, of architecture. Yeah, I would have told anybody on the wrong path. I mean, also, I think the lecture is a bit unusual in these honorable halls, because first of all, I don't consider myself a scientist, not at all. I'm just a hobby something. I'm not even an architect, nor am I a photographer. I'm an urban planner by profession. And the topic that I will be talking about is mainly the book, but then also the project behind. So that is not an ancient theme and topic. It's not like deep, serious culture and heritage, but it's very recent, and for some people not even on the radar of culture and heritage. So I will talk about the post-war architecture of Bangkok. Maybe first of all, a little bit more about me. When did I first encounter modernist architecture? I already was introduced. I studied urban planning at the Technical University Berlin, moved to Berlin to study, and while I was studying, I think year 2, we did a seminar on, no, actually year 3, because that coincides with 1989, when the wall came down in Berlin. So while we are doing this seminar, or at the beginning of the seminar, the wall came down, basically, and during the end of the seminar and the next semester, actually, we had the chance to focus not only on the housing estates, the so-called Siedlungen in the west of Berlin, but also we could survey for the first time those in the east of Berlin, which are equally stunning than those in the former west. I encountered all these beautiful housing estates by famous German architects like Martin Wagner or Bruno Taut or Hans Scharoun. And that was my first, I fell in love with modern architecture, or modernist architecture. In this case, from the late 20s and early 30s, you know, Bauhaus and so on. Next slide I will talk about it, but that's it about. And just one reminder, this is not my photos, this is historic photos and somehow upgraded. And I think, I'm not sure about the year, but actually these estates, 7 of them, have been listed, let's say about 10 years ago, as World Heritage. So UNESCO World Heritage. Modernist architecture is UNESCO World Heritage. Not only in Berlin, but also, for example, in Brazil and other places. Okay, next slide. Yeah, Bauhaus. Bauhaus. I have a very ambitious, no, not ambitious. I have a double-sided relation with Bauhaus, because when I lived in Hong Kong, talking about this kind of architecture in Hong Kong, every journalist and even architects say, oh, it's Bauhaus. This is Bauhaus. All Bauhaus. So I'm a bit fed up with this Bauhaus thing. Of course, the roots of modernist architecture are in the early 20th century or even late 19th century, when there was a modern movement. And the modern movement was not only architecture, of course. It was arts. It was a cultural movement, an arts movement. It was music, it was dance, it was literature, and also design and architecture. And we all know that, and that is really serious culture, and it influenced our way of living a lot. And that was actually also the point behind it, at least in architecture, to make a better living for the society and for people. That was the idea. Given the new challenges and also the complexities at the beginning of the 20th century. So Bauhaus then founded in I think 1919, something like that, and then moved to the new building by Walter Gropius in Dessau on the upper left, the Bauhaus Dessau. And then all these masters, all male, of the Bauhaus on the roof of that building, yeah, like with famous guys like Martin Gropius, founder, director, and Marcel Breuer, for example, architect, but also artists like Lionel Feininger or Paul Klee and others. Yes. And then on the right side, what we call international style, by the famous architects that everybody knows, like, for example, Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret, the Villa Savoy from the late 20s here, are on the lower right by Mies van der Rohe, the Seagram building, and I think it's in Chicago, yeah, okay. From the late 50s, about. And international style coming out somehow from the teachers of Bauhaus and those who learned at Bauhaus and had to move to US. And then international style is normally what we somehow relate to all these paradigms of, for example, form follows function. Yeah, functionalist architecture, rational functionalist architecture. Another thing is always quoted by Mies van der Rohe, but it's actually not a quote by Mies van der Rohe, is less is more. You know, like another important one that was, I think, Adolf Loos a little bit earlier, Ornament ist Verbrechen, so ornament is crime. So we don't need ornament, we need the pure function, the pure geometry of form and functional buildings. And it turned out to be a good idea, but then also a paradigm that was very strong and influencing lots of designers and architects around the world. But also, if we talk about international style, there is this critique. Yeah, that happened throughout the decades, and maybe with the end of modernist architecture in, let's say, the 80s, depends on the country and so forth. The harsh critique on the style that is somehow anonymous, that is somehow not related to the location and the region, and that could stand anywhere and so forth. So that all that is in a way true, but all that also is just a small part of the truth. Because when I first arrived in Asia, that was in '87 as a backpacker student on Khao San Road. It's a photo I've taken in that year. And then that was '87, and 20 years later, then I worked at urban design and urban planning offices, and I worked at university as well. And then after 20 years, in 2007, early 2007, me and my wife moved to Cambodia, which was a logical thing to do at the time, because after 20 years traveling Asia every year, sometimes twice, and also having university projects in Asia, and so it was like the logical thing to try and go and live and work there. So we moved to Cambodia, and from Cambodia we moved to Hanoi in Vietnam, North Vietnam, and then we moved to Hong Kong, where we stayed 10 years, and last year we moved back to Cambodia. So what I want to show you here is some photos that I actually haven't taken. The two on the bottom that are my photos, but those I took from the internet. So you have on the left a building, the National Sports Complex by Van Molivan, the famous architect of Cambodia from that time in Phnom Penh. You have on the right the Independence Palace by Ngo Viet Thu, again like the shining figure of modernist architecture, at least in the south of Vietnam. And then on the lower left, you have one of the maybe the most important or most famous public housing estate in Hong Kong, the Choi Hung estate, which will be actually torn down in the next 10 years. And we have the former British Council in the lower right by Dr. Sumit Jomsai in Bangkok. What I encountered in Asia, coming from German Bauhaus education, is that there are actually very different styles, very different buildings, and they all look not like what I knew from Berlin or from Dessau or anywhere. They were very different, and they were very varied also, and hybrid in a way. And so now, since let's say at least 10 years, we talk about these different hybrid modernisms in Asia, not only in Asia, but also in Asia. Thanks to scholars and organizations like, for example, Professor Johannes Widodo from NUS in Singapore, whom I quote here with modernism with a small m, what he calls modernism with a small m. So not the modernism with a capital letter M, like international style, worldwide, no, but many different hybrid, parallel, varied modernisms in different countries and regions of the world and in Asia. And that I found fascinating and much more convincing than this is Bauhaus. So, and then throughout the years in Asia, now it's 19 years, I started photographing. I started photographing in a strange format and style, as you will see, but I will explain about that. That's, for example, Phnom Penh. So we have two facades of two buildings by Van Molivan and two apartment buildings or mixed-use buildings. And then, for example, Hanoi, strong Russian influence, even Russian architects, state architecture, but also public housing, which is completely informal, taken over. I like it a lot, like with a second layer of informal stuff on the facade. Or in the south of Vietnam, the young daughter of Hanoi, in a way, Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, with the Independence Palace and different commercial buildings and For example, this used to be an apartment building, and it's now what they called apartment cafes. It's a big thing in Ho Chi Minh. Like they're up to the 10th or 12th floor, all cafes and small design studios and boutiques. I mean, this is only possible in Asia. And thank God it's possible in Asia. No urban planners with regulations. Okay, and then last week I've been to, after 20 years again, I've been to Vientiane. And Vientiane has also a modernist legacy. Again, different from the neighboring countries. Again, very specific. Again, tropical. By French architects who came with a French aid, mainly built schools, universities, hospitals. Some Russian architects, some American architects. Unfortunately, very few Laotian architects, for various reasons. It's a different lecture. I want to quote another team of scholars, because I'm none, the Southeast Asian Cultural Heritage Alliance, talking about Southeast Asian vernacular modernist architecture. So we're combining vernacular and modern, which is kind of an oxymoron, but it makes sense. So they say there's a strong interrelation between nature, culture, and architecture that has, in Asia, that has evolved through distinct historical phases. Initially, the vernacular architecture that we normally talk about, as cultural historians or as anthropologists or whatever, that like in specific areas by local knowledge, with local material, done by local people, for local cultural and environmental conditions, without any architects. That's what we call vernacular, in a way. Typologies, often typologies, like houses on stilts and blah, blah, blah. Then came colonialism. And the colonial area brought in Western architects, brought in Western influence, sometimes not really smart, the architecture I mean. Sometimes smart enough because, like for example, Ernest Hébrard in Vietnam, who worked for the French colonial government in Vietnam and came up with these urban planning extension designs for example, for Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City and Phnom Penh. He was also an architect and formed this, what is called Indochina style, where he came with, yes, French colonial architecture, but he transformed it in a tropical way with large verandas and even with vernacular Vietnamese decorations and elements. So also the French and British, I'm not sure, but the French learned a bit about when they came and yeah. And then what I'm most interested in is the post-independence period. So let's say from the 50s in those countries, because then modernist architecture, modern architecture became part of national programs, became part of national identity and of a proud new endeavor and modernization of the society. Like for example in Cambodia where I live, where Van Molivan as the chief architect was sent by King Norodom Sihanouk, was sent to France to study. Actually wanted to study law, but then was told to study architecture. Good idea actually, it turned out. Came back immediately to Cambodia to be part of what is called Sangkum Rianium, the difficult to translate, kind of a socialist, sort of religious society movement, yeah, and there's different translations, and so it was the after 1953, it was the and until the 1970s when the Khmer Rouge and all these atrocities happened. There was about 16 years basically where there was a huge national program in Cambodia. And Vanimoli Vanmot was not only made chief architect, he was actually the minister of public works and construction. He did all the major state buildings and many more. And other architect studying with him, Luban Hap, who worked at his office, became the chief architect of Phnom Penh. So this was political architecture also. It was a scheme by then head of state, Norodom Sihanouk. And these architects learned mostly abroad, because this generation learned abroad. In Cambodia, they learned mainly in France, very few in UK. In Vietnam, they learned also mainly in France, then later in the north in Russia. In Thailand, it happens many learned in US, some in UK. And they brought back what they learned from their modern influence, modern movement teachers in their countries, and adapted it to the local conditions. Local conditions not only being the climatic environment, but also the scarcity of construction materials, for example, the scarcity of skilled labor, and in Hong Kong, for example, when I wrote the Hong Kong book, I coined the term pragmatic modernism, and came up with pragmatic ideas at that time. So that's enough with text. And then in the maybe 8 years ago, more or less, I quitted working as an urban planning consultant, and I started doing books, because I lived in Battambang. It is a small provincial town in Cambodia. That's where I worked, doing all kinds of urban planning, including conservation, heritage conservation, and had all these photos. So this is a small photo book about Battambang. And then 2 architectural guides about Phnom Penh followed, including all the periods until contemporary architecture. There's an English and a Khmer version. And then I call it my COVID baby, is the Hong Kong Modern book, because I had all these photos from 7 years living in Hong Kong and walking the streets. I had more than 500 buildings documented. And then COVID struck, and I was stuck in Hong Kong, and I took these 2 years, or a bit more than 2 years, to do the research and write the Hong Kong book. And then after the Hong Kong book, more or less immediately, so mainly in 2023 and 24, I did the Bangkok book. But I started doing the photos for Bangkok already in 2017. Luckily, otherwise I would have missed a lot of buildings which are gone already. So this is the book. Now a bit more about the book. The book has, as I'm an urban planner and a generalist, has a hybrid concept. It is a coffee table book with large-scale photos, but it's also an architectural guide. And on the right, you see it's also, in a way, more serious, as I included the academic essays of some people who really know, architectural historians from Chulalongkorn and Silpakorn University. More than 300 projects featured in the book, out of a selection out of maybe 450. The period I focused on the 50s to 70s, so only 3 decades, with a few outliers in the early 80s. So I could have included the architecture after the Siamese Revolution in 1932 by the People's Party. There's still some magnificent buildings around, and so I would call it the early modernist architecture before the Second World War. But I decided not to do that, but instead focus again on post-war, and instead have one paper by Professor Chomchon Fuzinpaibun, who actually did his PhD on this early modernist architecture of the 1930s and 40s. And then the book is divided into 7 chapters, by typology, or you can say program of the buildings. Yeah? So there's residential, mixed use, a specific chapter on hotels, which I don't have in Hong Kong, because Bangkok has all these magnificent hotels from the 1960s and 70s. It's actually my favorite chapter. That's why I will show you 2 slides about it. So what was my curatorial strategy? First of all, of course, the architectural masterpieces, the landmarks that everybody knows and that were even discussed and published earlier in architectural magazines. For example, I found some of the Bangkok buildings in a Hong Kong-based publication. It's called the Hong Kong and Far East Builder, then the Far East Builder, and then the Architect something, so it changed names. But throughout 30 years, there were several articles about architecture, modernist architecture in Thailand. And buildings like these were featured, actually. And these magazines, just to let you know, are available digitized on the HKU, Hong Kong University Digital Library. So there is the Dusitani Hotel, there is the Scala Theatre and the Robert Building. I don't go into detail, it is too sad a story. Then the milestones in different aspects. For example, the Indra Regent Hotel was the first integrated commercial center in Bangkok with restaurants, retail, and a theater in the podium, and then a slab block with a hotel on top. And that was the first in Bangkok. And if you know Hong Kong and some parts of Hong Kong, they only consist of this typology. Basically, this typology, you could say, was maybe coined in US, but then in Hong Kong it was like the slab podium and slab block tower on top. Or the community housing of the 1960s and 70s in Bangkok. Not much is published about it, but there is standardized walk-up flats, 4 floors, industrial production influenced. For example, the architects who were responsible, they actually went to the Netherlands at the new Bouw-Instituut in Rotterdam and did a workshop there and were influenced by them. So they learned basically also from Western countries and came up with these ideas to do mass housing, not on a scale like Hong Kong or Singapore, but hundreds of buildings of various typologies, and the Dindeng type is the earliest, basically. And those are also, they already started to demolish those. And then, apart from these more prominent buildings, I decided to include this, what is called everyday architecture, coined by a colleague in the term in Singapore, from Docomomo, Singapore, which is the typical buildings, actually, the archetypal buildings of Bangkok. All the ubiquitous modernist shop houses that the city basically consists of. I mean, from the 60s to the late 80s, before they became out of fashion and even were criticized a lot for congestion and whatever. But they're still somehow the workhorses of the fabric, the urban fabric of Bangkok. So I included also those typologies, which were often not even done by architects, but you could buy them in catalogs and construction. Sino-Thai construction firms were building them, like once single, but sometimes like dozens in the same. And then some special finds. Many of them actually, if you walk the streets and if you listen what people say, is, for example, the three-column house, so-called three-column house by Nietzsche Rosson, who studied in US, came back, and that's actually his first project in Bangkok that he did for a structural engineer. And the structural engineer was bold enough to suggest that actually we just skip one column. We do with 3 columns. They somehow they used the first computer model, I don't remember, IBM, and they calculated how they can actually build this thing with 3 columns only. So it's completely cantilevered here, you see? Cars underneath, and it's still existing, and the family of the engineer is still living there. And then there's, for example, very interesting architects still among us. Paichit Pongpunluk, who is Muslim, of Muslim faith, and therefore he could design several mosques in not only in Thailand but also, for example, in Brunei. And he did his magnificent merging Islamic architecture with modernist and even Thai influences. I mean, it's all mainly in the east of Bangkok, and quite remote, but beautiful areas, all along small canals, Klong. Or I found unpublished buildings of, for example, Dr. Sumit Jumsai, like this. There's 2 mixed-use buildings, I think on Raja. Yes. Thank you. First part, the coffee table book with the photos. So why did I do the photos in the square, straight format? I just found by coincidence over the years in Hong Kong that is actually a good way to focus on the elements of the facade. Because if you're not distracted by sky or street or the neighboring buildings, then you have to focus. And also, if you rectify them and basically have them like an elevation drawing, like an architect would do the drawing in scale, then also that is a view that one not usually has. So it's kind of, what is this? So that is actually what I want to achieve with that. And also, why focus? Because I see certain qualities or characteristics, like for example these 5 points. There's more to them, but I will give you some examples for these 5. Minimalist aesthetics. So there's all these sometimes modular elements and these repetitions of different architectural elements. Like for example on the left side, which is the cover photo of the book, I like it a lot. It's by Dan Vrompassat, The Holiday Inn Salem. Actually a larger extension of a later extension of the hotel. And what he did is these windows actually have a diameter of 1.8 meter. And they are basically bay windows. I stayed there one night, not in one of these rooms. The wing was empty, but I asked them to show me. And actually you can sit in the bay window and it's really comfy. So it's not just for effect and a joke, it's functional. It's a bay window to sit in. Plus, it does all these things with the facade, these abstract and interplay with the sun and the shade, which I like a lot. So it is very 3-dimensional. Another example would be here the Kecharananta building on Petburi Road, which is one example for a brise soleil, a shading system that is very decorative and by no means not ornamental. It is ornamental. And then next focus is that all these, almost all the buildings that are encountered were tropical modernist buildings. They were adapted to the climate and the environment. And they were in a way passive and smart and green buildings. Not only because it makes sense, but also they were not the means and the construction materials, for example, to do something else. Like with architectural solutions and elements like open corridors, shading the classrooms, open ground floors for the children to play, or here at all the Kasikon Thai farmers' banks, where Rangsan Tosuban used this always this pointed, sometimes not, arches and arcades, very beautiful. In a way, being, but that is just a hypothesis, being influenced from his studies in US, where there were architects like Yamazaki, don't name me on the pre-name, Yamazaki, who did, for example, the World Trade Center, and who did lots of beautiful university campuses in the US with these elegant, late modernist, very thin arcades and columns and pointed arcades. Also then in this tropical modernism or climate adapted architecture, we have lots of perforated screen walls, sometimes just the I would say normal, what we call breeze blocks. This one's actually not so normal because it's the symbol of a German car brand, or like really creative solutions. One of my favorite architects, Captain Krista Arunvong, with his office casa here at the Xavier Hall, the monastery in Bangkok, who came up with these Thai patterns. I think you call them Lai Thai, and used them for custom designed breeze blocks to allow the cross ventilation of the building, at the same time shading the interior from the heat and the rain. So very clever, but also very beautiful, and not less is more. Other Brise Soleil solutions, of course, Brise Soleil is Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier was very early with Brise Soleil. Very beautiful solutions by another national artist, Watanyu Natalang. Here on the left, the Muang Thai Life Assurance, still existing. Or here, this was a professor also from Chulalongkorn. This kind of actually a factory building. And then very ingenious solutions for the interface between the environment and the interior of the building. So the skin of the building, basically. Very ingenious, very cutting-edge solutions, like from Intaren Architects. And you probably know the former Esso building, which also has been torn down just last year. And we have one of the architects of that office here, which I got to know 20 minutes ago. I'm very happy about it. David Russell, is it? Yes? Yes. So that is the best of all these, I mean, doing a book, yeah. Or here on the right, the Embassy of India with this, again, Brise Soleil structure frame, not structural, but this shading frame, and is actually a symbol. The national bird of India is the peacock, so it's basically transforming the peacock eye. Beautiful. And then another focus would be tectonics and structural expressions. Many of these buildings, actually, you can read the structure from outside. So you can see how the building works. That's what structural engineers, but also architects are mad about. I mean, really, what they love. Very special architect, Amon Srivong, who was actually the only one who was not a trained architect. Not at all, went to no architecture school, but did one of the boldest and most exciting buildings in Thailand. Many university buildings, you will see some later. And he did this exoskeleton for the Thai Patana, former Thai Patana Bank, still existing, still in good condition, by using, I think, only 5 different elements. He was able, precast, to do this exoskeleton, which holds the building, and no columns inside except the core, where you have the the staircase and the lifts, etc. Or the Science Center for Education today, before Science Museum, by, again, Sumit Jumsai, who is, that is also kind of technological frame inside that you can easily understand, and very honest structure. And some architects even experimented with modular precast concrete elements. Concrete was, of course, the building material of the time, like the Bangkok School for the Blind, again for Dr. Sumit Jumsai on the left, where he took the system basically of vernacular Thai wooden houses, and based on that did this kind of shelf from precast elements to have the school. And this is again Amon Srivong with the Faculty of Science at Mahidol, where he also did the buildings with precast elements. And Professor Pinay Sri Kyatikul wrote an essay in the Hong Kong book about these two architects and their experiments with precast concrete architecture. And actually then his lecture that we heard about, I don't know, in several weeks, is somehow related to that also. And then I go a bit faster now, because then the materials and finishes of the buildings. In the 70s was very en vogue to do béton brut, so exposed concrete, board marked and not painted or plastered. And there's still some around, like the Electricity Generating Authority of Thailand by Italian architects in the 70s, or the Kamal Sukoso building at this small canal, by Rang Santosuwan. And then there were other materials for finishes, like, for example, what we call in Hong Kong Shanghai plaster, which is actually like a plaster with a coarse granulate, like sometimes called pebble wash or something. Yeah? Like, and you can have it in different colors, actually beautiful and easy to maintain. And you have many, many buildings if you walk through Bangkok with these kind of finishes. And then other very specific Thai is using, okay, you cannot see here, but look in the book. I have several examples of ceramic tiles used at the facade of the building. Sometimes really traditional tiles, like I think it was called Dan Quian from Nakhon Ratchasima. Am I pronouncing right? Like unglazed even, and sometimes with decorations, so not plain. Beautiful. And then not only later, but sometimes using very cutting-edge materials at the time here in the 60s with aluminium panels. Again, a professor from Chulalongkorn. Or then in the 80s, of course, curtain wall, steel, glass, aluminium. We have the robot building by Dr. Sumit Jumsai that I have my activist t-shirt about today. The last focus is what I call Thainess, most difficult and hypothetical. I used the publication, The Politics of Thainess by Professor Pia Lada, published in an ASA journal. So she distinguishes three different levels of Thainess. One would be conventional Thai. This is what we call, as architects, normally like applied Thai style or simplified Thai style. Having these like gabled roofs on top of a modern building or a modernist buildings, or roof finials and elements. So yeah, this kind of decorative things. The next would be tropical Thai, what she calls tropical Thai. So elements that are climate adapted, mostly facade elements, and that sometimes they come with Thai ornaments. Like, for example, here, many people don't know, but these elements actually, and I have a question, is that actually Intaren architects, the Siam Square, the shop houses at Siam Square, and the old glazed tiles with this Thai pattern, used as a brise-soleil. And so there's different sources for different architects for Siam Square, basically. And here again by Krista Arungvong, we have the Thai Journalist Association, again with a very beautiful brise-soleil from these custom-designed, prefabricated elements with Thai patterns. Actually, that has also been destroyed last year. Just the facade, the brise-soleil, has been removed. And then we have let's say the highest level of Thainess, which he calls contemporary Thai, which is in a way more intelligent or going further by interpreting spatial concepts and typologies that are typical Thai. Like, for example, the Sala Parakeo at Chulalongkorn, where the architects interpreted the communal sala hall, reinterpreted it for the student center, or the Ban Xavier, the chapel at the monastery, again by Krista Arungvong, where he accomplished to merge traditional Thai typologies and elements with a tropical architecture. The thing is still today without air condition, and it's perfectly cool, with a Christian church. A wonderful building in top, and you can walk around there in the monastery. Beautiful, really. And just I add to what the professor wrote. For me, an aspect of Thainess is also playfulness. That is actually the architecture is sometimes fun. Fun to watch, but probably also fun to design. I give you these two examples. Something like this facade would not have been possible in Hong Kong. No developer and nor, I think, architectural firm probably, not well, Palmer and Termer with the Jardine house did something, you know, the Tower of 1,000 assholes. That's what they call it in Hong Kong, because there's all like insurance companies and bankers inside. Yeah, so. Beautiful building by Palmer and Turner, and this building for sure would not have been possible in Hong Kong. And I think that is for me an aspect of fun, of playfulness, that is also typical Thai. Coming to the architecture guide, now I go really faster. I used different historical magazines from the 50s to the 80s. Some I found in Hong Kong, some I found online, and some I found here in university libraries mainly. Very important, the old issues of the ASA journal of the Association of Siamese Architects. Actually here we have another building by Intaren Architects, and our architect who probably published in Hong Kong. Yes. And then other resources, teams of mainly Chulalongkorn University who did seminal works in the 90s and then in the early 2000s, focusing once on the architects and once more on the buildings, but very academic and very not so nice photos, and all in Thai. Yeah, basically these three, and then some more recent publications by, again, the Association of Siamese Architects. And then, of course, social networks. There's guys like Docomomo, you probably have heard of him, Bia Sing Noi or Verapon Sing Noi. Actually, now I can say, no, I say it in the end. And then there's another amazing, again, Facebook. You think Facebook, what is Facebook good for? Here, professor from Silpakorn, Rökti, and he has, I would say, 10,000 historical images and plans of different Thai buildings on his Facebook page, open as an archive, collected from wherever, I mean, over years. And then there's, of course, interest groups on Facebook or Instagram, like on Thai history, Bangkok history, cinema history, whatever, where you can find little snippets of information and piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle, and if you're lucky, you can get some meaningful information about the architects or the buildings. So there is a small chapter about the architects, their background, where they studied, about the history of the architectural faculties in Bangkok and Thailand also. And I did small profiles about 12 architects or offices in the book, which were kind of outstanding and also where information was available. A few of them being still around. Then there's also the maps with all the building maps mapped in and then there's this information about the history, the background, the architects of the buildings is put into introduction to each chapters. For example, here the hotel chapter, where I talk about the start of tourism in very slow in Thailand after the war, the Vietnam War as a huge influence, the DIs coming for R&R, rest and recuperation. Then actually in the 50s, hardly any hotels in Bangkok until the end of the 50s. In the 60s, a huge boom, especially in the second half of the 60s. Like, I think hotel or accommodation tripled. And then in the 70s, another step with bigger scale of hotels and also other hotels being expanded and with new wings, and like, for example, Ambassador Hotel or Dusitani or you name it. So, and these introductions to the chapters always only with historic images. The book contains about 250 historic images. Like, for example, the Siam Intercontinental that was demolished about 20 years ago. Beautiful building by an American architect. And then there are the building profiles, you can say. So the information about the buildings listed, blah, blah, blah. And then, for example, I'm coming back to the photo pages. This is 2 pages about the Dusitani Hotel. 2 facade, representative facade pictures that I took, fortunately, 2018 or so, before it was demolished in 2019 or 20. And this is the text about the Dusitani. So the Dusitani, I think, started in 1967 by a Thai entrepreneur, a lady. Actually, she owned the Princess Hotel on Silom Road before. Yeah, on Silom. Ah, okay. And she's been to Tokyo, and so the Okura Hotel by Yozo Shibata, huge hotel in Tokyo, and she was impressed, and she asked him to design a big international 5-star hotel for her, and it was the first by a Thai entrepreneur in Bangkok. And then, of course, with the landmark tower, which actually has Thai elements or had Thai elements in it, with the slightly tilted walls and the spire, etc. And of course, in the podium, the beautiful podium, many Thai elements, decoration, and so forth. But now gone. What I do normally then, there is a small block with the building facts, and then some more black and white photos done by me, like a total view or details, and then many historic images from different sources and the text. And this is the building facts. So what you have is the name, the address, the architect, and if known, in brackets, the project architects, and also, if known, other involved parties, like, for example, the interior designers or the structural engineers. Not always possible with each building, and there's many buildings actually in Bangkok where I couldn't find out the architect at all. Like, for example, all these modernist shop houses. There is no architect known. I mean, there was even no architect. So, and then, you know, with data banks and archives about architecture in Thailand, modernist architecture, not so easy. And then the year of completion, and in this case of demolition, the building number, which refers to the pages with the large photos, and a QR code with the location. Finally, the third part is the academic essays. I don't go into detail. This is the 4 essays by these 4 guys, scholars in their field. There's one about the early modern architecture of the 30s and 40s by Chomchon Fuzinpaibun. Then there's one about like an overview about the post-war modern architecture and Cold War. He calls it Cold War modernity, because obviously influenced by the US presence in Thailand and by Cold War. And then is what I talked about earlier, Professor Pinay, about these precast concrete elements. And finally, a photo essay by Photomomo, by Verapon Singnoi, who focused in these photos. He does much more beautiful photos. If you have seen, for example, his exhibition at BACC, I'm a huge fan. But he focused here on just the demolition of the buildings, showing the demolition of the buildings on 4 pages. So I don't show you all the essay pages, just some examples. Finally, talking about my motivation, demolition and loss, even while I was taking photos, I recognized that very important buildings were gone or were going to be demolished. Like, for example, the Scala Theatre by Colonel Jira Sepakanok, or the Paris Theatre. I don't know if anybody of you has been before, which is again by Dr. Sumit Jumsai. What I could find out actually in the M+ Design Museum has part of the Sumit Jumsai collection got by Dr. Sumit. And I could find out about this. It's like circular shop houses with like a cake wedge put in the cinema, but has been demolished again last year. Only the shop house is remaining. Another one, of course, the Tusitani, we talked about it, and then the Robert Building, which has been not demolished but completely defaced and doesn't make sense anymore. Actually, the whole act of doing that is not only barbaric, but also economically doesn't make sense. You have a landmark building, once from American Architecture Museum, don't nail me where, called one of the most important buildings of the 20th century, among the 100 most important buildings of the 20th century. And you have this asset, and you destroy it? A bank? I don't know. But also, to end on a more positive note, there's the good practices, the positive examples for example, from the private sector. I just have chosen here 3 hotels. I could have chosen converted shop houses into different uses and so modernized and so. But I chose 3 hotels, very specifically Atlanta. Some of you will know, which is kind of a museum by the son of Dr. Max Henn, a German immigrant who came to Bangkok and did this and that, many different things, but also built this hotel. And the Miami Hotel, which has been also inherited actually by architects, young architects, and they did a wonderful job, not by painstakingly conserving everything, but by conserving the spirit of the 1960s. And they won an ASA Conservation Award for that. few years ago. And also the Montian Hotel on a bigger scale, which also has been very sympathetically renovated. Yeah. Also public sector, there is some positive examples, like for example the Benjakiti Forest Park Museum, which used to be the tobacco factory by Rangsang Tosuwan, and is now kind of a half empty, half museum thing in the beautiful park. And then the Bank of Thailand Learning Center that you probably all know, which has been earlier the banknote printing house by Santaya Isasarena. Can I say it like this? Isarasena. Okay. Sounds Spanish. So, last slide. What do I intend with the book? Maybe a link between the past and the future. Show the past, to give the historic context in images and some narratives. Present, to document what is now there, a snapshot. Sometimes maybe to rediscover some buildings and walk and rediscover Bangkok, provoke some reflections, and in the future, maybe as a small archival record and for historic evidence and as a catalyst for memories. With that, there has been 2 exhibitions, one at Goethe-Institut, one at ASA Expo just last week, and from next week, I don't know the day yet, but let's say from end of next week, for 4 weeks, there will be an exhibition of my photos and the photos of Photomomo of Biesing Noi at the Faculty of Architecture of Chulalongkorn University in the library. Beautiful building, beautiful room, really worth going there, even without the exhibition. The whole thing wouldn't have been possible without the support by River Books, by Goethe-Institut, by Bangkok Design Week, because the Goethe-Institut exhibition was part of Bangkok Design Week. A huge thank you to the Association of Siamese Architects, and also especially to Docomomo Thai. If you don't know, Docomomo Thai is the Thai chapter of Docomomo International, which has about, I would say, 60 plus chapters worldwide, and is the, I don't know, is it institution or association or for the documentation and documentation and conservation of the modern movements, it's in the name. Yeah, and they're doing incredible work in raising awareness for this more recent heritage. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kun Walter. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. We have microphones around here. By the way, just let me start. Did you get to see the former Australian embassy on Sathorn Road, which is now demolished? It's covered with mustard yellow ceramics all over, and in front there was a small pond, and when they first opened there were maybe a pair or 2 of black swans. Stunning.
I know the photos from Photomomo, who fortunately got in before it was demolished, and it would have probably been one of my top 3 buildings in Bangkok, I think.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and mostly for the book that you've published, which is really amazing for everybody here and outside Bangkok who are interested about architecture and urban planning, even though we might not say this in Bangkok. I have just one question so far. Have you been in contact with the Thai authorities, whether it could be the Ministry of Culture or the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, in order to raise awareness also on what you just mentioned, which is like the cultural assets that Bangkok has here, but that we slowly sometimes see disappearing without even realizing that it's about to disappear?
No, I haven't been in contact. But the, is it called the governor or the mayor of Bangkok? The mayor of Bangkok, he came late, but he came to the book launch at River Books, and he got the book. So there's a photo with the mayor of Bangkok with a book, but I missed him because he was very late. But he came anyway. But it was a book launch of 3 different books, so not only mine. Yeah. I think Docomomo Thai has been over the years several times and regularly in contact with the local government here and talking about the issues with conservation and raising awareness for modernist architecture, because that is actually their main purpose. Yeah, but it's from what they tell me, it's difficult. Yeah, and coming from Hong Kong, also difficult in Hong Kong. Hong Kong takes patience. In Hong Kong now, for example, the City Hall from 1963 has been listed, and listed highest grade, cannot even be changed. That is something very positive in Hong Kong, because before in Hong Kong only things that were 100 years old. Yeah, but it takes time. From what I heard from Docomomo Thai here, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, the mechanisms are there in Bangkok, in Thailand, but it's Fine Arts Department or Fine Arts Ministry, I don't know, and but the gremia, the how to say, the guys in charge are basically not even architects, they're archaeologists, historians, and they don't come from the field of expertise of modern architecture. So.
Just one last thing. You were humble enough to say that you're not a scientist, but the way you've approached the subject is very impressive in terms of methodic approach. It's very, very detailed and very extensive regarding the information that you've been able to gather, which was really impressive, I think, from everybody here. So I'd like to thank you again for the work you've been doing in terms of not only the people who love architecture, but in terms of memory of mankind and architecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, really mixed emotions during this presentation actually, because I've lived in a great modernist building that still stands, tropical modern, didn't need the aircon, and fantastic memories of the Intercontinental, being in the outdoors with the peacocks running around. It was just amazing. And quick note about the Australian Embassy that I think M.L. Devakun actually advised on, who was the architect for the Indian Embassy.
Contact architect.
Yeah. So he, those tiles, the Australian Embassy still has them. And I saw them last week, the election. They had them, they had some of them on a feature wall in the courtyard, but they have a stack of them upstairs somewhere. Yeah, so FYI. But no, back to the point. Question. A few years ago, I flew to Phnom Penh for architecture tours by architecture students of Van Mollivan's work. Does anything like that happen here? Do architecture students or architects give, I don't know, tours of Chula or places like that to experience and appreciate these buildings?
Yeah, I know the guys in Phnom Penh. It's called Khmer Architecture Tours, KA Tours. They're doing incredible work since more than 10 years. So you can book them online and so, and they have different tours, even with the cyclo and so. I think, for example, Docomomo Beer has done some guided tours. There was the guided tour here by Siamese Society. I don't personally know of a regular, maybe professional, money-wise initiative yet, but I think there's enough knowledge, and there's the people are here, and I think the interest would also be there.
May I add to that? The Faculty of Architecture at Chulalongkorn, sometimes they do tours, but I think among themselves for students and the professors and people interested for modernist or modern architecture. Some society did one tour so far for modern and modernist architecture, beside the usual temples and palaces. in June, the third Saturday, I will lead a tour to 4 or to 5 buildings. We're still working on which buildings will be open for us, because most of these ones are in private properties. So we have to ask permission, we have to ask this and that. So wait and see, it will be announced in a week or two. But we do architectural tours sometimes, beside the usual things that you know.
Thank you for a really outstanding lecture. I wonder if for people like the Siam Society, who are working on trying to conserve architectural heritage, if you would have any advice based on your experience in the 5 countries in which you have worked, Thailand, the 3 Indo-Chinese, and Hong Kong, on what strategies work best. Is it best done by getting government intervention, as you have indicated in Hong Kong with the City Hall, or is it best done through mass civil society movement? We've seen failure of that with the Scala Theatre here, but success more recently in a building that is not within your modern area, but the Daejeon Temple in the Chulalongkorn community there, where they've successfully, through a mass movement, stopped it. What, in your experience, is the advice you would give to us on how to best get these buildings conserved?
I think difficult question. I would say more important is a bottom-up approach. I'm not sure whether it would be a civil movement, but actions like this that try something, or with the Scala Theatre, publishing, getting into the media, raising awareness, banging the drum, I think. And then, of course, of people who know, or journalists, or scientists, or whatever, to make other people understand, because without understanding, you cannot show affection and so forth. And if you're born and raised in a city and you commute every day over decades, you don't appreciate those buildings anymore. You just take them for granted. It's really like somebody from an architect has to come, specific architect with a niche interest, a nerd basically, or somebody from outside to say, you have something very precious here, very unique, different from other countries, different from other cities. And you don't want to look like all the others. Don't use your unique selling purpose. Don't use your history. Don't lose it, not use it. So I think without all this awareness, advocacy thing, there's no light on the horizon. At a certain point, of course, it would help if the government steps in and develops the mechanisms and understands. But how can they understand? They're bureaucrats. I mean, or even worse, politicians, and so they have to be made to understand. Yeah.
Could you tell us briefly the story about the robot building? Because surely people were trying to educate the owners what was the significance of the building, and they really, it's not that they demolished it to build something bigger and more expensive, they just destroyed the facade. Like, what did they try, and why the arguments did not persuade them? Like, yeah, if it sounds like you know some insider information because you were part of the movement to save it.
Actually, I'm not the right guy to answer the question, but I do anyway, because I was not part of the movement. Docomomo Thai and others, also some newspapers, I think there was even Guardian and New York Times and so forth, were involved. I remember one answer of one professor, Pongkwan Lassus, who's one of the founders of Docomomo Thai. She got the same question during the book launch, actually. And she also had to do like this because it doesn't make economic sense. what they write, the bank is from Singapore, and what they write is like to bring to today's environmental standards in terms of working conditions and energy efficiency and so forth. That's the reason they give.
I think this bank, a friend of mine who's working there, she told me the reason they faced the robot building may be feng shui. Who believes that? Feng shui usually works both inside and outside. But for outside, this building with the face and everything, does it affect the bank or not? I'm not sure. But for the reasons about environmental issues, etc., and then functional issues, that's another thing.
And you know that Dr. Sumit Jumsai also wrote a very emotional article and published it during that time. Yeah. So they could have, for example, like they did with the Murray House in very important high-rise government building, public works department, office building in Hong Kong, that was converted 7 years ago into a luxury hotel by Foster and Partners. And they did a really nice job, and they involved as a consultant the original architect who was living in Britain in his 80s. And yeah, so they could have done something with Dr. Sumit Jumsai in bringing the building up to environmental standards, obviously. Sorry. Yes.
You have another question? Please raise your hand. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, please.
For what it's worth, I was involved in the mid-70s with forming the first Hong Kong Heritage Society. And our aim was to get the government to enact legislation which was copied from British legislation. And we were singularly unsuccessful. And what happened was this, that we tried to save some of the best buildings in Hong Kong. Many of them, well, most of them were actually of the British regime there. And we met headlong opposition from the government, which turned into an absolutely appalling mess. Very briefly, we held a public meeting. I was involved in the management of the Hong Kong Society of Architects. And so I was given the job of forming the Heritage Society. We called a public meeting, and it was very well attended, hundreds of people. We met in the cathedral. And we formed the committee. We had 4 professors from the Hong Kong University, and so on, and 6 people or so from the general public. And we tried to get the legislation which was existing enacted. And the government gave us absolutely zero. They didn't listen to us, they didn't reply to any letters. It was appalling. And so in the end, we were forced to take the matter into our own hands, and we petitioned the governor. And inevitably, we got a letter 3 weeks later from the governor saying, we're not interested. And so we decided to petition the Queen, being the head of state. And this is very interesting because my wife happened to be, who is Thai and an architect, incidentally, who happened to be in London at the time. I sent to her the petition. And the petition had been signed pretty well 50-50 by foreigners in Hong Kong and by the local Chinese, who felt just as strongly as we did. They didn't know what the buildings were used for, but nevertheless it was part of their lives. And my wife delivered it in person to Buckingham Palace, which was an amazing experience. At any rate, 5 weeks later, we got a letter back from the same lowly clerk who had written the reply from the governor, saying no. And this appalling business went on. And I heard just 2 years ago, I had a copy of the New Statesman in England of the 12th of December 1980 sent to me, and it described the Hong Kong government as a fascist state, and it said why, and it went through it said that the government had formed a secret committee to monitor all the people taking part, like the Heritage Society and other government departments, to monitor the people who were organizing these things, because we were against Hong Kong's interests. And but I didn't know anything about this at the time. But I found as an architect in Hong Kong that my submissions were subject to the government for approval, would be subject to delays. It's actually very interesting. At the time, I was a part-time professor at the university, and many of my students had actually been recent students, had actually got the job of supervising the architects' submissions of drawings. And because they agreed with me, an ex-tutor, my drawings got primary treatment and were rushed through. But at any rate, it worked out in the end really catastrophic. It turned out in the end that the government, there was absolutely zero public involvement in the government of Hong Kong. The government of Hong Kong was run by bureaucrats from England, together with the richest property developers in the country. And the government it was pointed out by the New Statesman that the government's income there was no income tax in Hong Kong. The income for the government came from the sale of leaseholds on all the property in Hong Kong, the vast majority of which was 60-year leases, and that's where they got their income from. And they reckoned that if the Heritage Society was correct, a lot of buildings would remain as they were, and the leases couldn't be sold because the buildings had to remain. And so this was the reason why the Heritage Society was singularly unsuccessful. And I suspect that if the same thing happened in Thailand, we would be getting involved in politics and financial interests of the super rich, as we were involved in Hong Kong. It's that, I think, is one of the main reasons why it would never be successful in Thailand, sadly.
I have a question to the audience, because I recognized in Hong Kong, while staying in Hong Kong, there was this, with social networks, actually triggering it, and because of various reasons, for example, China taking over, there was this atmosphere in Hong Kong of what is typical Hong Kong, and this kind of looking back and looking on what is very Hong Kong, what makes the identity of Hong Kong in various fields and also in architecture. And there was the interest, if only by posting photos or whatever on Instagram or whatever of young people in certain buildings of that time in Hong Kong, and became quite fashionable actually, so the architecture of that time, and this typical Hong Kong mixed-use blocks, you know, in a way it was sexy again. Yeah. So and my question to you would be, can you imagine, or is it even already the case, that this architecture could somehow get fashionable again? Not like for a few nerdy architects, but like in more general. Yeah, that's my question.
Anyone would like to answer that?
Maybe just a word about, like, this is not exactly the period you're talking about during the 50s to the 70s, but if you have a look at the Chinatown district or That Noi and the Bogos district there, you have a lot of people who are reinvesting the local architecture. Thank you. Some of the buildings are also like a little bit industrial, like it used to be the workshop of some local people. So if you have a look, even like there is the Mustang Blue hotel, which was before, if I'm not wrong, a bank actually, and it used also to be a pharmacy or a hospital, I think. And so now it's used as the hotel. So there is I think the younger generation is quite interested into reinvesting that local architecture, which might not be the most obvious one for the general people, but the one that the local people know about, and they want to preserve it somehow. So I think you have in some districts in Bangkok this will to give a second life to those buildings, and I have to say that most of the time it's been done brilliantly.
You can see these cases in Songwat Road, for example, Bantat Thong and all this. But it turns out most people who go there are Instagrammers who want to take the selfies in these coffee shops and sit there for hours and hours. Of course, the business that generate, because I have some friends who have business around there, the business they generate is not, doesn't correlate with the Instagrammers or number of people who go there. Of course, it brings people, it brings awareness to these heritage buildings too. And of course, I think the small businesses that happen there are usually cafes, shops, restaurants, boutique hotels, etc. You know, and another one like Soi Nana near Mustang Blue. Yes. What else? You know, Charoen Krung around Warehouse 30. Lots of these places are often busy during the weekend from younger crowds. And yes.
And there's also, I think it's really up to the private sector, because there's these old family-run businesses, and as long as the young generation inheriting understands and appreciates, there's really a future for these businesses and these buildings. A positive example, I'm staying at a very humble hotel near Hua Lamphong. It's called the Krung Kasem Sri Kum Hotel, which is a super nice 1960s hotel, and it's basically untouched, just renovated and a little bit modernized, and it's like bursting with people of Thai, Chinese, whatever, and they're doing really good business. I mean, they have a superb location, and they really know about this building. And a bad example would be the the Olympic department store. Yeah, where the 102-year-old lady passed away last year, and the new generation doesn't have the sense or the power to continue the department store. So it's closed now.
One more question, please. That's it,
There's
please.
just one more comment. You talk about young people being amongst those who are very interested these days. When we were fighting for the railway station, the saving of the railway station in Hong Kong, for instance, there was an identical one in Beijing at the other end of the line, and it was quite an important landmark, I would say. I went to the low-cost housing estates and gave talks on heritage and so on. And I also was out in the street collecting signatures from passers by. And there was one very old man, probably nearing his 90s, carrying, he was still working, carrying on his neck, goods for people. And he stopped. I handed him the form to sign, if you agreed. It was in Chinese, of course. And he stopped, he put his goods down on the ground, and he looked at it very, very carefully, like this. And he said, in Chinese, but it was translated to me, he said, I've been passing this railway station for 70 years, every day, and I've told the time from the clock tower. And he said, if they knock it down, he said, I would be lost. And that was a very interesting, heartfelt comment by a typical occupant of Hong Kong.
On that note, architecture is about not just a place, it's where we live, our home, how we live and we work, eat, love, and play, and pray. Thank you very much, Kun Walter, Koditek, and thank you for the audience for the comments and questions.